Why is Crash Bandicoot more popular than Spyro the Dragon? Why is there more Crash games coming out of the wazoo? Why does it seem that Spyro has been left behind? Well, let's talk about it.
Whoa!
What's up, guys? Canadian Guy here, and back with a brand new, well, spicy video. Before I even begin, though, this is not a who is better video. No, not by a long shot. I love both Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon to death. In fact, if I was forced to choose one, I would have to pick Spyro, but only for two subjective reasons. One, Spyro was my very first console game ever, only beaten by Pokemon Yellow in terms of very first game. And two, Spyro was the catalyst to this channel that you are viewing. Without Spyro, this channel would have never existed in the first place. So, because of that, I have to give that honor to Spyro. But nonetheless, I'm basing that on subjective sentimental value. Now, if we were to look at this through a factual eye and see what's going on overall between both of the franchises, it definitely seems that Crash Bandicoot is the more popular of the two. Let's look at the obvious sheer amount of titles created over the past couple of years. First, we had Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, followed by Spyro Reignited Trilogy. Both remakes that absolutely killed it. In my opinion, I felt that Spyro Reignited did a little bit better of a job. While Crash Insane was a great textbook remaster, Spyro Reignited added and reimagined assets from the ground up. Also, take a look at their Metacritic scores. Overall, Spyro did beat Crash by a very small margin. So, after these two games came out, and with Spyro doing seemingly a little bit better than Crash, we would likely see them equally over the next couple of years, right? Right? Well, you already know that answer. The following year from Spyro Reignited, we got Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. Then we had Crash Bandicoot 4. And then the Crash on the Run mobile game. And just when you thought that we couldn't be getting any more Crash Bandicoot games, we have evidence of Wumpa League, a Crash Bandicoot free-to-play multiplayer, being somewhere in development. So again, why is Crash Bandicoot overshadowing Spyro so much? Let's dive right into this question. It all starts back on the PlayStation 1. Whenever a new console is released, companies need to come out swinging with good games in order to validate buying a console. We don't buy consoles because they look pretty. We buy them because they play our favorite games. If there is no games, there's no need for the console. So, companies rush to have great games come out during what's called the launch window. Now, there is no hard date or rule to exactly what the launch window is for a console. But typically, the first 2 years of a console's life is a good ballpark number. The reason I say that is because it takes 2 years to get consoles into a proper and good production schedule and into people's hands, except for the PS5 apparently. But within that 2-year window, when you pick up this brand new console, the game library is small. You might want 1 or 2 games within that small library, but when you rip through those titles, you're more likely to try other games because of the console's short list of initial titles. This means that titles that release as early as possible in the generation have a better chance of sales before the market gets oversaturated with other titles. Take a look at the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo publicly lists their top 10 sales for games for the Switch. 7 of those 10 games released within that 2-year window, with the #1 selling game being Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which released 1 month after the launch of the Nintendo Switch. Now, let's rewind to 1995. 1995 was the year of the American release of the PlayStation console. Now, remember that launch window that I talked about? Can you guess who fell into that slot? Yep, Crash Bandicoot. The first Crash game came out on September 9th, 1996. Now, Crash Bandicoot did something that is considered as the golden goose in the video game industry. Crash was a brand new IP that came out during the launch window of a successful console. And, of course, most importantly, it was fun! Crash Bandicoot was then picked up by everyone who picked up a PlayStation 1, because again, it had a limited library of games back in the day. And again, it was fun. Because of that, it converted many gamers into becoming fans of the game, even if they weren't initially interested in playing the game. Because again, people are more willing to try new games when you have a limited library. But Crash also did something that many people thought was almost impossible for a North American game. It became insanely popular in Japan. Many young adults loved Crash in Japan, but felt that the marketing was too aggressive in North America. So they gave the game a different marketing outlook to better match the Japanese markets, and it worked wonders. So, Sony being based in Japan, but having offices in North America and beginning to become a worldwide phenomenon, they turned Crash into a pseudo mascot. While Crash was technically a third-party game, many people thought it was a first-party title. To this day, people think that Crash was owned by Sony at one point. Everyone associated Crash Bandicoot with PlayStation, so that is how they marketed the game. But you can tell the success of a game by its sequel. How many people did it hook? How many people wanted a second helping? Well, Crash Bandicoot 2 came out and it sold even better than the first game. This tells Sony and us that Crash Bandicoot perfectly achieved what it was supposed to do. Because of the limited library of the PlayStation 1 at launch, it bottlenecked gamers to try many games within that limited library, and then converted those gamers into fans. So when a brand new Crash Bandicoot title comes out, it still stands out compared to others, even though it's in a more saturated market than when the initial title came out. That legacy has carried over to today, as a report in 2018 said that Insane Trilogy had sold over 10 million sales, which is more than any of the other titles that released back in the 90s. Crash also has massive appeal in Brazil and the Middle East. There's even a Crash Bandicoot themed cafe in Saudi Arabia. But now, let's rotate over to the Purple Boy. Spyro and Crash had always been seen hand in hand, as Naughty Dog and Insomniac shared offices and both worked under Universal. Spyro the Dragon in fact had a demo included with Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, but Spyro came out in 1998, 3 years after the launch of the PlayStation. This means that Spyro had released in a more saturated market in comparison to Crash Bandicoot, but Spyro still did very well, clocking in almost 5 million sales worldwide, just 2 million behind Crash Bandicoot in a more saturated market. In fact, the first Spyro sold a little bit better than Crash in North America, which shocked me when I found out. Now, Spyro did very well in both the North American and European markets. But what about Japan, the birthplace of PlayStation? Well, it wasn't good. Spyro absolutely bombed in Japan. And I mean bombed, like awful, terrible, awful.
Alright, I get it!
While Crash Bandicoot did the impossible, Spyro did what was typical for a North American title. It went down in a fiery billow of flames. But why? Let's be real here. Dragons have a huge cultural significance to Japan, being depicted in many stories and legends. Why would a game about a dragon bomb in Japan? When Spyro was shown off in Japan, playtesters were sending in reports that Spyro felt like he moved too fast, making people feel what they apparently called 3D sickness. So they decided to not only slow down Spyro's charge, but just take the camera from Crash Bandicoot and just plop it into Spyro. That's it. They just copy, pasted, and plopped it. This is how the game is played. Look at this.
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it!
The camera just floats there in a stagnant state of stupidity as Spyro just runs around. The only fix is to press and hold triangle and it would rotate the camera back around. Suffice to say, when this game went public, the camera was so bad, nobody liked it. including the people of Japan. I mean, again, look at it. Not only did they radically change the gameplay of Spyro the Dragon, turning it into this chugging mess, the advertising for Spyro in Japan was abysmal. Crash literally had ads galore. In fact, if you go on YouTube, there's a 13-minute compilation for all the PS1 titles alone that were exclusively made for the Japanese market. Now, I scoured the internet for Japanese ads for Spyro, and I only found one. And it was of gliding children in phys ed. Seriously, I'm not joking. This is the only ad that I could find from the Japanese market. Sony literally gave Japanese Crash his own suit, a theme song. A theme song! Meanwhile, Spyro the Dragon? Yeah, he gets one ad that's so poorly done you can't even tell that it's a commercial for Spyro till the last 8 seconds. I know Japanese commercials are typically odd, but with the Crash ones, there's at least brand recognizability. There wasn't even any ads that I could find for Japanese Ripto's Rage. Marketing is a huge part of selling your game, and when there's no marketing, how could anyone know the game even exists in the first place? It gets worse though. Spyro performed so poorly in Japan with its awful gameplay changes and its non-existent marketing that they never even made a Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon for Japan. The company that was gonna port the game went bankrupt and was dissolved. So, Sony simply gave up on the series entirely in the Japanese market. All of these factors, of course, affected the sales of Spyro as a series and suppressed its overall success in the global market. Essentially, Crash's release was during the perfect set of circumstances to create a legacy that established the IP and makes him internationally known. While Spyro, even though is seen as the little brother to Crash, was hamstrung by a later release in a saturated market and being horribly ported and marketed to the Japanese audience, which lowered his global presence. There are also other factors to feed into all of this, like how Spyro Year of the Dragon had a war on two fronts, coming out when the PS1 market was at peak saturation and literally released 2 days before the PlayStation 2 launched in North America. Spyro Under the Dragonfly bombing and being one of the worst games to ever come out for the PlayStation 2, Spyro being rebooted into the Legend of Spyro series, which was not akin to the original games and split many fans, and then placed into Skylanders. While Crash relatively stayed the same brand-wise, well, until the Titans games came out, then he went dormant, showed up as a guest in Skylanders, and then returned to his roots in Insane Trilogy. The point is, Crash didn't change too much, while Spyro was rebooted once and then shifted to another game series, which was kind of like a reboot. It was very odd for Spyro. All of these factors fed into Crash and Spyro's success as franchises. But I think the reason why we are seeing so much more Crash Bandicoot in recent years is because it's a more historically ingrained and established IP in comparison to Spyro, at least to the eyes of Activision.